Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking a little bit about kind of some of the conflicts at the beginning of the Cold War and what went down with that. So you should have your notes on the Chinese Civil War and the Korean War. So we're going to start with the Chinese Civil War. So kind of here's what goes down here. During the 1950s, we are allied with the leader Chiang Kai-shek. He is the current leader of China, and you'll remember he was our ally during World War II, right? So the nationalists in China support Chiang Kai-shek and his policies. The problem is some of his policies are not all that great. There is a famine in China at this time, and he institutes a high grain tax where essentially what people have to do is pay grain to the government instead of money, which is hurting for a lot of people. They don't have any they don't have any grain, first of all, and whatever they do have, they need to use to feed their families. And of course, they're not able to. There's also a pretty harsh secret police in China that kind of keeps everybody in line. So popular reaction to him turns against him. So people are starting to say, this is really not what we're interested in at this point. And as we have seen, desperate people are tempted by communism. So the Communist Party starts to grow in China. It's led by a guy named Mao Zedong. He becomes known as Chairman Mao. And what he says is that there is too huge of a distribution between the rich and the poor in China. So what we need to do is we need to redistribute the land of China so that everybody has the same amount of land and the same amount of wealth. Well, those opinions are pretty popular, especially when the conditions in China at the moment. So widespread support starts to go towards communism. So there's going to be a civil war in China between the nationalists and the communists. So let's think about this for a minute, where China is in the world. Who are we going to support as Americans? Well, we're going to support the nationalists, right? Because we don't like communists. Who's going to support the communists? Soviet Union. They want to see communism spread, right? We're trying to see the spread of communism stopped. Remember that Truman Doctrine, right? We want to see the stop of communism spreading. So we get involved in the Civil War. So the thing to remember is that we choose to support the nationalists, but we support them with money, not with troops. That's going to be really important, okay? Because that's going to come back to bite Harry Truman. He decides not to send troops. The problem is that for us, at least, the communists had been so supported by the regular people in China that throughout the 3 years of the Civil War, they're able to spread very quickly. You see from the map here, they go from the northern tip of China all through the whole continent. By 1950, the entire country is communist, and they win pretty easily. China becomes called the People's Republic of China, or the PRC. You need to know it's called the People's Republic of China. And Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist supporters flee to Taiwan. So Taiwan is this little bitty island right off the coast of China right here. Well, as you can imagine, Americans are not happy about this outcome, right? So remember, in the United Nations, China has one of the seats on the Security Council. Well, there's already one communist on the Security Council with the Soviet Union. We do not want to see another communist on the Security Council. So we decide that we are not going to officially recognize China under the People's Republic, and we give that seat on the UN Security Council to the nationalist in Taiwan. So we're basically saying, hey guys, you know that big old country? Yeah, that's not China anymore. China's Taiwan now. Well, obviously China is not Taiwan, right? But that's going to be what we recognize it. The USSR, the Soviet Union, is so upset about this that they choose to boycott the United Nations and refuse to come and participate. This is actually going to be really important as well. So you need to remember Taiwan takes China's seat on the Security Council, and the Soviet Union chooses to boycott the Security Council, okay? So the United States is pretty upset about this. They basically see that Truman lost China to communism. They say, hey man, you were supposed to stop its spread. You lost it to communism. Democracy is lost. Truman has failed to contain, right? So think about if communism again is the tomato soup has just gotten all over our Chinese takeout, right? We don't like that, okay? So the United States is really upset about this, and Truman basically realizes at this point that the United States wants to see a more direct action taken against communism. So this is going to lead directly to the Korean War. And it's the mistakes, so to speak, that happen in China that are going to lead to our involvement in the Korean War. So in order to understand the background of the Korean War, you kind of have to understand where we are coming from, okay? So in Korea, it had been a Japanese colony from 1910, from the end of the Russian-Japanese War, to 1915, at the end of World War I, okay? At the end of World War II, Korea was kind of caught in the middle, okay, between Japan, Soviet Union, and the United States. So troops in the northern part of Korea surrender to when Japan surrenders, troops in the northern part surrender to the Soviet Union because that's where they're closest to. Troops in the south surrender to the United States. Okay, these are Japanese troops, I should say. So North Korea surrenders to communists. South Korea surrenders to Democrats. Okay. So if you look, here's a map here. You can see North Korea right up there. They surrender to the USSR. Once China becomes communist, they're right there, right? So North Korea is going to be heavily influenced by communists. South Korea, because the United States is there, they're going to be much more heavily influenced by capitalism and democracy, okay? So North Korea, like I said, is communist, okay? They are led by a guy named Kim Il-sung, who was the grandfather of the current leader of Korea, and they are going to be allies with the Soviet Union and eventually China, right? South Korea is led by is a democratic and capitalist-run nation. It's going to be led by a guy named Syngman Rhee, and it is going to be allies with the United States, all right? So that's all fine and dandy, until it's time to unify Korea. And the North wants to unify as communist. The South wants to unify as democratic, all right? So look where the line is right there. That 38th parallel is the line that divides North and South Korea. So the war kind of begins with the 38th parallel. So move on to your Korea page here. It's the one that's got all the maps on it. We're going to go through really quickly how the Korean War kind of goes down, all right? So remember, North is communist, that's the red. The South is capitalist, that's the blue, okay? So in June 1950, when the war begins, the aggressor is North Korea. So North Korea crosses that 38th parallel where the partition was, and they go down and invade the South and capture the capital city of Seoul, all right? So that's down there in the South. The United Nations, not the United States, decides that they are going to support the South, and they send troops. Now, keep in mind, the Security Council only needs one vote to overthrow a decision. And you would think that the Soviet Union would want to not invade, right? They don't want to support the South. They want to support the North. That's their allies. But remember, they had boycotted the United Nations, so the Soviet Union is not there, okay? You would also think that China would want to support the North, okay? China's on the Security Council too. They could vote to overthrow. Except Mao Zedong and the communists are not on the Security Council. Taiwan and the nationalists are. So we get full support because we don't recognize China and because the Soviet Union is boycotting. So we send troops, the United Nations sends troops in order to support the South. MacArthur is going to be the leader of those troops, and 90% of the United Nations troops come from the United States. So it's mostly U.S. troops here in Korea, right? So second part of the war takes place September 1950, and again, the aggressor is North Korea. Basically, there is a big movement, and the North Koreans push the UN troops almost out of Korea. They are pushed down into the bottom to the city of Pusan, where the United Nations is trapped. So at this point, the communists in North Korea have pretty much taken over almost all of Korea, and by September it looks like we're screwed, right? It looks like we've lost this war. So in September to October of 1950, the United Nations and the United States decides that they need to come up with a new offensive in order to take back Korea. So they have what's called the Miracle Counterattack at Incheon. So you can see there that's right across from Seoul. So on September 15th, 1950, an amphibious attack lands at Incheon, and it's called a miracle because we are able to move in and sweep up north from Incheon and then from Busan and push all the way to the border of North Korea, and it looks like North Korea has been defeated because basically we now have almost all of it, except for this little piece at the Yalu River, which is still where the northern troops are situated. And, of course, look what is right up there as well. What nation is just across the Yalu River? Hey, that's China, right? So here's the problem. China is obviously not going to support North Korea. They're going to, as communists, or South Korea, they're going to, as communists, support North Korea. So, in November 1950, China joins in with North Korean forces, and from November to January of 1951, China and North Korea cross across the Yalu River, enter the war, and push down. Now, MacArthur wants to go in and bomb China. Okay, he wants to go in and just set off nuclear weapons in China. Well, Truman is not crazy about this idea. He's like, no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to bomb them, so you can just get that out of your brain. Well, MacArthur's pretty pissed. And so he decides he's going to go on this speaking tour all around the country where he just talks bad about Truman. Well, the problem is you can't talk bad about your boss, right? So MacArthur gets fired, right? General MacArthur, the hero of the Philippines, is fired from this war. Truman sets in a new general who's going to support him. And so what they decide to do instead is push the North back as far as they can. The North only reaches Seoul. All right, so they push down and they reach the city of Seoul at the 38th parallel. Well, we don't want them to take any more, okay? So at this point, a stalemate happens where nobody is moving one way or the other. So both sides, because they're not able to move, by January call a ceasefire. The war is over by January of 1951, so just under a year, right? This war is considered a success for the Americans. Why? North Korea came back, right? But here's the thing. What was the goal? The goal was to contain communism where it already was. Guess what? We did that. Communism is contained in North Korea. North Korea was already communist, right? We didn't get rid of it, but we contained it. And look where the war ends, at the truce line. 1953, the official truce is signed, and we organize a treaty organization called SEATO, which is the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. And the war ends exactly where it began, with communism in the north and capitalism and democracy in the south. To this day, Korea is still divided into two countries, with communism in the north and democracy and capitalism in the south. This war, which was the war itself was fought over a year, but the treaty took 2 more years, so it's a 3-year total war, ended up in the exact same place it started, with just a bunch of men that had died, right? Oh, and by the way, this wasn't officially a war. War was never declared. This was called a police action, right? Well, okay, except that it's still a war, right? So this is a really interesting little war because it's not very long, but it really represents what the Cold War is all about. This containment of communism, this desire to support nations for really no other reason than they're not communist, right? So that's kind of where we end up here. We'll keep talking about some of the effects of all this in class. So I'll see you soon. Goodbye.